It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Poland's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be looking at Poland's squad for the 2022 World Cup. So let us go back to the points at the beginning. I don't actually have much to add to them other than to just repeat them. We talked about them being better in qualifying and having generally poor showings in the final. So 2016 was the only time they passed the group stage. But of course, Poland fans feel that they're a better team than that and would certainly like to see them go beyond the group stage, as they did in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s, where I think they got 2 third-place finishes in those World Cups. We talked quite a bit about at the beginning about the firing of managers. So through the course of this, we did see that the new manager brought in quite a few new players in March 2022 and kind of experimented with them a bit in the June games. And now that leads to a new problem, which I'll get to soon. A couple of players did kind of go off the team with the coming in of the new manager, but basically more came in than went out. So I'll actually jump to that point right away and say, I think Poland's biggest concern is that they have too many players kind of on the plate right now, and they're going to have to narrow this down. But especially in the central midfield, they have a lot of players shuffling in and out and seem kind of undecided as to a starting squad. Actually, one of the overarching issues for me of this World Cup is whether it's better to start with a really steady group of players or whether it's better to have a bit of rotation among the players, perhaps 3 players, kind of 3 starters for 2 positions, and then giving those players a rest. But anyway, Poland has even a bit more than that, and will only be allowed to bring 26 players. So they'll have to cut some, and we'll talk about that later. The other point I made above was that this is a period of relative strength for Poland. And I don't really have much more to say about that. But so far, that strength has really just meant reaching cups rather than actually performing well in cups. So again, that's something they will want to see in this cup. Let's talk about club affiliations on the whole. So we see a lot of players actually leave Poland and join clubs in other countries, especially in Europe. So right now, I actually don't have, I see that there's only a small number of players who actually play for clubs in Poland. And one of those is Grosicki, who plays for Pogoń Szczecin. And I'm kind of looking hard for another, but I can't find one. Most of them seem to gravitate towards Italy. So we have several players, maybe a third of them playing for clubs in Italy, and some of the bigger clubs too, like Juventus and Fiorentina, but also some with smaller clubs like Spezia and Sampdoria along that kind of level. And then in every other country too. So, of course, Lewandowski has recently moved from Bayern Munich to Barcelona in Spain. So he's with the very toppest of clubs. And we saw that they have one player who signed a contract in Russia, so wasn't allowed to play. So those who were playing for Russian clubs have generally been loaned out now to clubs outside of Russia because the federation basically told them to do that. Among the players with teams in England, It's not really the top teams in England, but kind of let's say the bottom half of the Premier League there. So teams like Aston Villa, Southampton, and Brighton are represented, and even Barnsley, Michael Halleck, one of their lesser used players, that's a second division team in England. And then, of course, Germany, they have a few players with teams like Wolfsburgs and Augsburg and Bochum. So again, not really the top level teams in Germany, but good teams nonetheless. So that's the story of Poland. They tend to leave Poland once they're able to sign on with bigger teams in Europe. Okay, club affiliations. Let's talk about age and experience a little bit now. So if you've been listening to other podcasts, you'll know that I've been working on a kind of a bit of a statistics page. And I'm looking at the total number of candidates that the team is kind of has on their plate, if you will. And so I basically compiled a list of players who have been called up since 2020. And the average is about 51. And Poland is lower than that with 44. So that's actually kind of a good thing in a way. There are a couple of teams in the 60s, like USA and Mexico and Ecuador, and it just seems like they have way too many players floating around, to say nothing of the disappointment of those players, because less than half of them will make it to the final squad. So 44 is a good number of players to be juggling. And it's lower than most teams, actually. But most of those players for Poland are at the definite, likely, or possible. So they have 36 players under consideration, and that is actually higher than average. So they've been giving these players game time, kind of testing them out. And they will have a bit of a problem cutting 10 of them, because 10 of the players we listed as possible or higher here will have to go. And just as an example, for goalkeepers, they have one definite, and I believe it was 2 likely and 1 possible. So, one of them's got to go. And there's always room for a couple of surprises, that it may be one of the likely ones who don't end up making the squad. The third stat we have is players who are in the definite or likely category, and that's 22. So even if we have a couple of surprises, let's say, and a couple of players are cut there, and it goes down to 20. At 22, it means only 4 of the possible players can be added, unless you start cutting the likely, or players get injured, and Poland does have some injury problems, which we'll talk about soon. So the coach had some headaches there. He's basically got to cut 10 players, and doesn't have a lot of room to work with there. Okay, some of the other stats we look at are average age of the club, of the team. Now, this actually doesn't matter much, because we have seen older teams win World Cups. The advantage being that they're more experienced and probably have a better chemistry on the field, because they've been playing together for a long time. On the other hand, the younger teams have the advantage of youth and speed, probably speed. So it's hard to say what it actually means. But I'll just say that this is at the slightly higher range. 25 to 27 is basically the range, and the average I have right now is 26.3. So they're just slightly higher than that. So no particular issue to talk about there. Average number of caps is 28.6, and this is actually slightly also slightly above average, which kind of goes hand in hand with the team being slightly older than average. The total number of goals is kind of an interesting one. I'm still kind of learning how to interpret it. 171 for Poland, and this kind of takes me by surprise because I don't really see them as a high-scoring team, but I'm beginning to change my mind when I see the other forwards they have beside Lewandowski with the percentages that they have. Maybe I got to start looking at Poland as a scoring team. But I generally watch them in the cups where they haven't been at their best, I would say, and they seem to me a team that kind of struggles to score, even though I know the reputation of Lewandowski. So they'll be looking basically this stat indicates that they score a lot of goals in qualifying. And so Polish fans will be looking to see that in the cup. Just one more interesting detail here. I didn't take out Lewandowski's goals. I reduced them to an average scoring ratio of 25%, which is maybe an average scoring ratio for forwards. So with Lewandowski reduced to average, the number of goals goes down to 128. So basically, Lewandowski is responsible for an inordinate number of goals for them. Now, it stands to reason because he is the forward, but he's particularly prolific. Lewandowski has 76 goals in his 132 games, so he actually accounts for about 40% of these goals that we see here. So with Lewandowski's goals reduced, it ends up being fairly average. The average is 117 goals. Nevertheless, maybe we got to change our perception of Poland as being potentially a high-scoring team. When we look at the average of goals per player, 4.8, that's also quite a bit higher than other teams. And again, it would be 3.6 with Lewandowski's goals reduced to the average, and 3.6 would be slightly below other teams. But not sure where all this is leading. But Poland could be a high-scoring team if they find their form in the cup. Having said that, they're usually playing weaker teams in qualifying, so it stands to reason they would score more goals. But particularly, Poland wants to see Lewandowski with his shooting boots on. Okay, let's take a look at some of the players and issues to watch. Actually, not that many with Poland. But one of them is whether the defense should be a 3 or 4 man back line. So we did actually see that they usually go with a 3-man back line. And then interestingly, in the Nations League Cup, and this is largely under the new manager, he went back to a 4-man back line for the first 4 games. And then for the last 2 games, returned to a 3-man back line. So perhaps he decided that that's the best fit for Poland, as the other managers had decided also, because they also generally favored a 3-man back line. So I guess I'm expecting to see the 3 central defenders in the cup, and then the left and right defenders either moving up or that winger position being played by an actual winger. All right, they in the central midfielders have decisions to make. It seems a bit unsettled. It's more than just a rotation of 3 or 4 players. It's really, I'd say 6 or 7 players coming in, none of them playing much more than half the games, So to me, that means that it's players kind of getting used to different players all the time. And the advantage of having a settled squad would be that the players around you are predictable because you play with them a lot. If those players are always changing, it may be harder to develop chemistry on the team. They also really got to settle on the wingers as well. Again, maybe a few too many players jumping in and out of those positions. We did see Joswiak as being very stable on the right side, ironically being a left winger, but he was kind of ensconced in the position on the right side. But then halfway through qualification, he disappeared, and they used a whole bunch of different players in that position. And as I said, even in their September games here, used two different players in that position, so they're not settled. I would say Frankowski on the right side, and I can't even say on the left side, Puchak or Zalewski. Zalewski actually did play the two games in September there, so perhaps they are settling on him. Okay, and then the final player issue in the forward line is goals, or those players. We saw that the attackers really have good scoring records. I never actually went over that, so let me just tell you the percentages there. Robert Lewandowski scores in 57% of his games, 58% of his games. That is incredible for an attacker. Even 40% is a really high scoring ratio. And even though the other forwards have fewer games under their belt, Arkadiusz Milik has a 25% ratio. Piatek is at 40%, 43%. That's 10 goals in 23 games. Swiderski also 44% with 7 goals in 16 games. And who was the other one? Buska, 5 goals in 9 games. I doubt he'd keep up that average, but that's over 50% too. So their forwards really score a lot of goals. I got to say, though, none of the other players really do score that many goals. So most of those guys are under 15%. So they really rely on the forwards to put the balls in the net. The question being, are we going to see it in the cup? So, as I said, Lewandowski did score 3 goals in the Euro 2020. But they only earned a single draw in that tournament. So they want to kind of get meaningful production to get past the group stage. All right, let's take a look at some of the new names. So if you want the details on these, you'd have to kind of go back to the player-by-player section. But actually, the first new name is manager Czeslaw Mikniewicz. Who just came in after the finish of the regular round of qualifying, but his first major game for the team was the playoff game, which they won over Sweden to get to this, but he did the Nations League games too, but still quite new to the squad. In goal, we have Bartholomew Dragowski, who we consider a likely candidate. And we also have Kamil Grabara, who we consider a possible candidate, but they're going to have to cut, which we'll get to soon when we do the kind of starting lineup prediction. In central defense, we have Jacob Kiwior, who seems to be making good inroads to the squad, as does Matty Cash, the right back. And Robert Gumney is in there too. Matty Cash we have as definite to make the cup, and Robert Gumney as possible. And we move Jacob Kiwior up from possible to likely because he started in the September games here, started both games. In the midfield, we have Simon Zurkowski. He's new to the team also. And Sebastian Szymanski. Both of those are likely candidates. Oops. Simon Zurkowski and Sebastian Szymanski. And in the forward line, we have two also, Adam Buksa scoring a lot of goals, and Krzysztof Piatek. So having done this podcast, I'm a bit more excited about the forwards here. But again, will they get the service that they've been getting in qualifying? Let's take a look at injury concerns. I'm going to start with lesser used players. So fortunately, most of these injuries are to players, not kind of key players. So we have a few who are basically were in the possible but unlikely category. And so I'll start with those for dramatic purposes. Kamil Pestka, and I'll just actually look up when they're due back as we're talking about this. But he is out with a sideband tear, whatever that is, and his return date is unknown. We're a couple of months out from the Cup here, so there is a chance that they'll return. But I got to say, an unknown return date is a bit of a concern even at this point. Arkadiusz Reka, he is out with muscle injury, also an unknown return date. Marcin Kamiński, that is a laceration. That basically just means a cut of some kind, return unknown. So depending on the kind of laceration, that looks like something he could recover for. But again, he was possible but unlikely. So was Bartosz Salaman, the centre back, who was out with abductor problems. Again, an unknown return date. Now we move to a possible candidate was Jacek Góralski, and he has muscle injury with an unknown return date. So, but you would think a muscle injury may be something he can recover from before the Cup. Okay, getting more worrisome, we have Arkadiusz Milik, who we saw was out for quite a while, even during the games that we looked at in this period. And I'm just trying to look up his problem. I actually think he might be back in action, and he was on the bench for the September games, actually subbed in. So it looks like kind of whatever kept him off the squad, he's over. So actually, I'll remove him from the injury list here. I'm glad to see him back. Jacob Moder. Jacob Moder is with Brighton. So he's we've seen in the Premier League that he's been injured with a cruciate ligament rupture. Now he was out in June, so there is a chance that he could recover from that in time, but it sounds pretty serious. He's listed as return unknown. So that's a bit worrying because he was a definite candidate. Same with the other Premier League player, Matty Cash. Now, I think he is due back soon. Yeah, he's due back right around now from a torn tendon. So with about a month and a half to recover here, he probably will be okay. So a few injury concerns, and we will update in the update podcast there. Okay, now let's move on to notable absences. So I'm actually going to add a few names for those who just follow kind of from World Cup to World Cup. Lucas Fabianski declared himself retired last August. So played a game in October, but it was a kind of a farewell game. Kamil Jozwiak, who we saw actually play the first half of this period as a fixture on the right wing, but then in the second half he disappeared. Maciej Rybus was banned from the team because he signed a contract with the Russian team, whereas Polish players were told to leave their Russian team. So we won't be seeing him at the Cup. And then gone for a bit longer, Jacob Blaszczykowski, He had 108 caps with the team and was the captain. But the World Cup was his last tournament. He didn't participate in the Euro 2020 Cup, so he's been off the team for a while. And same with Lucas Pidczak. And I got to apologize to Polish fans for my brutal pronunciation of these names, but it really is a jungle of consonants out there. So I don't even know how you do it. I actually phoned a Polish friend to go over these names, but I wasn't able to reach him, so I was very fearful coming into this. Anyway, Lucas Pidczak, if you're watching on YouTube, you can at least see the spelling. He also wasn't part of the Euro 2020 squad, but he was a starter in the World Cup 2018, even though he did lose his starting position. But he's been off the team for a while. But again, for people wondering where those 2018 starters have gone, there we have it. Okay, the last matter we're going to deal with is going through the team once more and predicting the starters. So we saw that they went through two managers, firing one not long before the Euro Cup and the other basically in December of last year after qualification. So these poor managers got Poland through qualification and then lost their job. You can hear the details in the player by player. Anyway, it's Czesław Michnowicz, who is the manager for the team. I doubt they will change that now. And once again, you can see the if their name is colored in gray there on YouTube, that means they haven't been through a tournament before. Okay, for goalkeepers, Wojciech Szczesny, we almost certain he'll be the starter because even when Lukas Fabianski was there, he still got the starting position over him. However, they do have a bit of a headache for substitutes with, well, I would guess Lucas Skorupski looks like he would be the first backup. So maybe the difficult decision is between the likely and the possible candidates, Dragowski and Grabara, but we're not really getting into that here, mainly focusing on the starters. For central defense, I would say Bednarak and Glick have been the most steady in that position. We talked about them using a three-man central defense, so it looks like Jacob Kiwior is moving into that position. I'm almost going to say I'm almost going to put him as a starter here because he's really made inroads. Started the two games in September as a thing, but maybe that's too bold, and I'll just put him as a definite substitute at least. Among the other ones, as I said, for the Nations League, they brought in a different group of players, kind of secondary players to try out. So it's really hard to say who among these players will be chosen. But generally they bring probably around 5 central defenders. So I think a couple of them will be, but I can't really hazard a guess as to which player has much stronger chances than the others. So Dawidovic, Halleck, and Wiateska seem possible candidates, whereas Salomon and Kaminski seem possible but unlikely. And we saw that Kaminski is also on the injury list. For left backs, we have Timotheus Pukas. So I would say, I wouldn't say as a starter. Oh, that's tough. Well, they got to use someone, but they sometimes bring people from a different part of the field. So I'm not confident enough. Okay, I'm going to put him as a starter, but I'm not 100% on that. The only other candidates we have are possible but unlikely. However, there is a chance of a central midfielder or even a left winger moving into that role. So no, I can't put Pukas as a starter. I just can't, because there's too much chance it'll be someone else. On the right back, though, I'm a bit more confident in Berezinski as a starter. and we have him as a definite candidate for the cup. However, he is being challenged by Matty Cash, who, despite being on the injury list, should make it to the cup. But I still think Cash will be more of the backup there, and I'm gonna go with that. We do have two possible candidates, Gumney and Kedziora, to be on the squad, but I don't think they're in the running as a starter. Okay, defensive midfielder, Gregor Krychowiak. I'm going to say a definite because they're playing tougher teams here, and so they will need a more defensive-minded midfielder. So I think he will be a starter here. But I really am not confident enough to say anyone else as a starter. Actually, Goralski is on the injured list too, so that's another strike against him as a possible starter. So I'm going to leave those alone. Jacob Moda we have as a definite candidate, and who knows, if he's fit, he could be a starter, but he's been out for a lot of games now, so we haven't seen him in the system for a while, so I'm not bold enough to say that he'd be a starter. Matthias Klitsch and Carol Linetti. Well, I think one of those two will start, but I honestly can't say, which one will. Neither of them have played enough games to make an argument that they would be a starter. But they are often in the squad. Actually, Simon Zurkowski seems to be making inroads. Yeah, he actually did start the one of the September games, so he's also a possible, but I think a little behind Klitsch and Linetti. Left midfielders, again, Camille Grosicki has kind of been drifting off the squad, but then started to come back in towards the end. But I certainly wouldn't have him as a starter because he really hasn't been. Zalewski is a left winger. There's several left wingers who are potential candidates to start. And I'm seeing Zalewski as having started both games on the left. So I'm glad I kind of took the green off of the left back there. Pukac, and I think Zalewski's a more likely starter. So I'm actually going to say him because he started the September games, but not with any great confidence. It's also the fact that the other players don't look far less likely than he does. Rybas actually is basically off the team because of signing that contract with the Russian team. Frankowski does seem to have been making inroads on the squad, and I believe he started in September too. The problem is Berezowski, the left or the right back, often moves into the position. So I'm not confident enough to say that Frankowski is a starter. He is if it's a left attacking or a right attacking midfielder, but as a winger, I just think there's too many candidates and they haven't really decided, so can't put him as a starter. Peter Zielinski, wherever they use him, I think he'll be as a starter. Just as an example, in the 3-5-2, they used him as a central a central midfielder. That was in the second game of the Nations League in September. And in the first game, they used him as a right attacking midfielder. So the guy could be anywhere, but he usually is on the pitch. Actually, Sebastian Szymanski also seems to be making inroads into the team. He did start one of the two games, but I can't put him down as a starter. Robert Lewandowski, I'm fairly confident. In fact, I would bet one of my children that he's going to be a starter. Okay, I wouldn't bet one of my children, but I do have that level of confidence. And because they often do start with two forwards, I think I'm going to put Swiderski as a starter. Am I? Well, definitely the backup. Then they had two forwards in one game in September, but just a single forward in the second last game. And to be honest, they do that often enough that I don't think we can say Swiderski is a starter. But it's going to be interesting among the forwards. Keep your eye on whoever is subbing in, because the forward position tends to be the one they sub, usually at 70 minutes or so. And so the substitutes make a big difference here. Arkadiusz Milik has a big task ahead in resuming his position kind of as one of the top forwards, because Swiderski, Buksa and Piatek are all scoring really well, and Milik has an injury concern on top of it. So it'll be tough for him to kind of get back the kind of start, or the kind of I wouldn't say starting spot, but the place in his team that he had before his injury. However, he was selected for the September games and even subbed in, so a good turn of events for him. That brings us to the end of this International Soccer Podcast on the players of Poland, and keep in mind that we'll be doing an update as new information comes out. So sometime, I'm guessing, mid-November, when we know who the final selections are, we'll do a podcast there. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That is Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website is soccerphiles.captivate.fm, where you can find all our podcasts. Also, check the show notes for links to other podcasts relevant to this one. And see you next time. Bye-bye.